Step out of the car right now, or I'll drag you out myself. Officer Daniel Carter's voice tore through the calm hum of Harper's Cafe on Main Street, loud enough to silence every conversation on the patio. His tone carried no restraint, only raw authority and impatience. Before we dive into what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe, and give this video a quick like so more people can hear Judge Amara's story. The morning sun spilled across Franklin's historic Main Street, but Judge Amara Thompson barely noticed it as she drove her silver 2018 Honda Accord past the row of shops and brick-front cafes. At 42, Amara carried herself with a quiet strength earned through decades of perseverance. The daughter of a school teacher and a factory worker from Memphis, she had fought to overcome barriers most people never faced, now serving as one of the youngest judges on the Tennessee Supreme Court, dressed in a soft beige blazer over a navy blouse. Her mind was focused on a complicated civil rights case waiting for her at the courthouse downtown. She had just taken a sip of lukewarm coffee when blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Her speedometer read 48 in a 50 zone, no sudden lane changes, no violations. Yet the police cruiser behind her surged forward, its siren screaming once before Carter's voice barked through the loudspeaker. "Pull over! Now!" Amara guided her car to the curb, stopping just outside Harper's Cafe, where dozens of people were sipping lattes and scrolling their phones. Officer Daniel Carter climbed out of his cruiser with fast, heavy strides, one hand resting dangerously close to his holster. At just 29, Carter had a reputation inside the department, a string of excessive force complaints, a suspension that had quietly disappeared from his record, and an attitude sharpened by resentment. Today, his frustration boiled close to the surface. He walked right up to the driver's side window, his jaw tight, eyes sharp. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone clipped, carrying the weight of authority rather than professionalism. Amara lowered her window calmly, her movements deliberate, her voice steady. "Good morning, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she said, careful to keep her tone respectful but firm. "You were speeding," Carter snapped. Amara glanced at the dashboard, then back at him. "I don't believe I was over the limit, sir," she replied softly, trying to de-escalate. Carter leaned in closer, his voice dropping, edged with hostility. "I said you were speeding. That's all you need to know." "All right," Amara said quietly. "I'll get my license." But before she could reach for her purse, Carter yanked her door open so violently it slammed against the curb. Gasps rippled across the cafe patio. Coffee cups froze mid-air. Conversations stopped cold. Among the stunned onlookers was 19-year-old Maya Johnson, a barista on her break. Her brother had died during a police stop 2 years earlier, and something deep inside her told her to press record. Within seconds, her live stream went live. Out of the car, Carter barked, stepping back just enough to let Amara move, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Amara stepped out slowly, her palms open and visible. "Officer." "I am complying," she said, her voice soft but clear, every syllable measured. Carter's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts. His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't stall with me." Then it happened. Without warning, Carter's open palm swung hard and fast, striking Amara across the face. The sharp crack echoed against the brick walls of Harper's Cafe, silencing the entire street. The sound was louder than the traffic, louder than the murmurs of the crowd, louder than the moment itself. Amara stumbled slightly but caught herself, standing tall despite the burning sting radiating down her cheek. Gasps erupted from the patio. Chairs scraped against pavement. Maya's hand trembled, but she didn't stop filming. "Oh my God," someone whispered behind her. Eleanor Brooks, a 60-year-old retired teacher and longtime civil rights activist, dropped her coffee entirely, her voice cutting sharp through the stunned silence. What are you doing?" Carter didn't answer. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wild, locked on Amara as though expecting resistance that never came. Amara didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket with slow, deliberate movements and pulled out a polished Tennessee Supreme Court badge. She held it up between them, the sunlight catching its edge, her voice steady and unshaken. "Officer," she said firmly, each word deliberate. "You just struck a judge." Carter froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it was as though the color had been wiped away. His bravado crumbled instantly, behind him. Murmurs swelled into angry whispers, the energy of the crowd shifting from confusion to outrage. Maya's live stream spiked past 8,000 viewers within minutes, the comments exploding with disbelief and fury. "She's a judge!" someone shouted from the cafe steps. "You messed up big time!" another voice yelled. The tension in the air grew heavier by the second. Carter swallowed hard, his hand falling away from his holster. He stepped back once, then again, his shoulders stiff but trembling. He fumbled for his radio, his voice cracking as he tried to maintain control. "Unit 3 requesting backup on Main Street," he stammered, barely audible. Officer involved incident. But his words meant little now. Cameras were everywhere. Maya's live stream, Eleanor's phone, and a dozen more from witnesses who had pulled out their devices. A wall of recording lights faced him, unblinking and unrelenting. Amara stood in the center of it all, composed yet resolute, the red mark on her cheek a silent indictment of everything that had just happened. Her gaze stayed fixed on Carter, unyielding, her voice low but firm when she finally spoke again. "You will answer for this," she said, and as those words left her lips, the sound of approaching sirens began to rise in the distance, under the summer heat. The tension outside Harper's Cafe thickened like smoke, every second stretching longer than the last as Officer Daniel Carter stood frozen in place, his hand twitching uselessly near his holster while the crowd grew restless around him, their whispers turning into sharp murmurs of outrage. Maya Johnson's live stream climbed past 15,000 viewers, the comments scrolling so quickly she couldn't keep up. Did he just hit her? That's a judge. Fire him now! The whole internet watching the scene unravel in real time. A teenage skateboarder at the edge of the crowd muttered just loud enough for Carter to hear. "You're done, man." While Eleanor Brooks, the silver-haired activist whose voice had steadied many protests over the years, stepped forward, her hand raised calmly but firmly. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice carrying authority despite its softness. "You need to step back." Carter ignored her, his jaw tight, sweat sliding down his temple. But his composure was gone, stripped away by Amara's badge, the cameras, and the sheer weight of the witnesses surrounding him. Amara stood still, her hands folded calmly in front of her, though the red welt across her cheek spoke louder than any words could. Her gaze fixed on Carter with unshakable resolve as she repeated slowly, "You will answer for this." A ripple passed through the crowd. Quiet gasps, phones lifting higher, a sense that something far bigger than a traffic stop was unfolding. Then came the sound of tires screeching against asphalt as two patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing violently, and from the first stepped Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, a tall, broad-shouldered black officer in his early 50s, his years of service carved into the deep lines of his face. Hayes had seen conflict before, but even from a distance, he understood instantly that this was different. The crowd's energy wasn't just tense, it was volatile. He scanned the scene, Amara standing firm, Carter pale and rigid, dozens of witnesses recording from every angle, and his jaw tightened as he approached, the badge on his chest gleaming under the sunlight. "Judge Thompson," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear as he stepped between her and Carter. "Are you hurt?" Amara didn't speak. She simply turned her face slightly to show him the swelling cheek. the faint outline of a handprint still burning against her skin. Hayes inhaled sharply, forcing the breath down before his own frustration slipped through. His voice calm but clipped when he turned to Carter. "What happened here? Officer Carter?" Carter shifted on his feet, his voice cracking as he stammered. I didn't know who she was. She wasn't complying. And, stop. Hayes interrupted sharply, his tone like steel cutting through air. Don't finish that sentence. Around them. The crowd edged closer, phones rising higher, voices murmuring louder, every eye locked on the confrontation unfolding. Maya whispered into her phone. Lieutenant Hayes is here now, narrating live as her viewers shot past 30,000. The hashtags Justice for Amara and Harper Cafe incident already trending across social media. Hayes exhaled slowly, his shoulders square, his voice carrying a weight Carter couldn't match. "Hand me your badge and your weapon," he said evenly, extending his hand without a tremor. For a moment, Carter hesitated, his gaze darting from Hayes to the cameras to the crowd swelling at the edge of the sidewalk. "Sir? Now," Hayes said, his voice low but commanding, and something in his tone left no room for defiance. Slowly, reluctantly. Carter unclipped his badge and unholstered his sidearm, handing both over to Hayes with trembling hands. A collective murmur swept through the crowd, half in relief, half in stunned disbelief, as Hayes signaled to one of the arriving officers to escort Carter to his vehicle. "Stay there until I speak with you," he ordered coldly, and Carter obeyed without argument, his head bowed as he walked away. The energy shifted again, from chaos toward something quieter but heavier, the weight of accountability settling in the air. Eleanor stepped closer to Amara, resting a steadying hand on her arm. "We've got you," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. Amara nodded once in silent thanks, her gaze still fixed on the patrol car where Carter sat stiffly inside, his silhouette small behind the glass. But the moment wasn't over, far from it. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Maya announced breathlessly into her phone. "We're at 45,000 viewers now. People are flooding the comments, lawyers, reporters, everyone's watching." A man in a baseball cap stepped forward, voice loud enough to carry, "I got the whole thing on video. 3 angles." Another chimed in, "So do I." Suddenly, the weight of public witness became undeniable. Hayes turned to the group, raising his hand slightly to calm them. "Folks," he said, his tone steady, measured. "I understand your anger. I do. But we need to let this process play out the right way. There's going to be accountability. You have my word." "From somewhere in the back," someone shouted. "If she wasn't a judge, would you even be here?" The question hung heavy in the air, striking harder than any blow, and Hayes paused for just a second, visibly swallowing the truth everyone already knew. Then he nodded slowly, his expression grave. "I'm here because it happened," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "and it should never happen to anyone." The crowd's noise softened, not with satisfaction, but with focus, their anger sharpening into determination as cameras continued rolling. Maya zoomed in on Amara, her voice shaking as she whispered into her live stream. She hasn't said a word except to hold him accountable. She's standing like a rock. She's unshaken. By now. Amara's phone was buzzing endlessly in her pocket. Colleagues, reporters, friends. But she ignored it, choosing instead to stand tall in the center of the storm, her silence speaking louder than any soundbite could. A small group of college students nearby began chanting softly, "Justice for Amara, justice for Amara." The words picking up in volume until dozens joined in, the rhythm growing louder, steadier, undeniable, across the street. A local news van screeched to a halt, reporters spilling out with cameras raised, quickly scanning for the best angles. A helicopter circled overhead, its blades chopping through the heavy air. while tweets and live stream clips spread like wildfire across the country. By the time Hayes escorted Amara to the shade near the cafe, Maya's stream had crossed 70,000 viewers, and hashtags demanding Carter's arrest climbed into the top 5 trending topics nationwide. Hayes leaned in slightly, his voice lowered so only Amara could hear. "We'll need you to give a statement," he said, "but for now, we'll get you somewhere safe." Amara shook her head gently, her voice calm but resolute when she finally spoke. "I'm not hiding," she said simply, her gaze sweeping across the crowd gathering behind the police tape now being rolled out by arriving officers. They need to see this through. Her words carried weight, settling into the air like a promise, and even Hayes, hardened by decades on the force, nodded in quiet respect. Meanwhile, Carter sat rigid in the back of the cruiser, his hands clasped tightly together, his career unraveling before his eyes as the crowd outside chanted louder, phones still trained on the car that now held him. The tension hadn't lifted. It had transformed, no longer chaotic but focused, a collective energy pressing forward toward accountability. Within minutes, reporters shouted questions, microphones extended, cameras flashing. But Amara stayed silent, her expression steady, her resolve unbroken, as Hayes ordered additional units to secure the area. One thought settled over everyone present, unspoken but undeniable. This was no longer just an incident on Main Street. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something neither Carter nor the department could contain. And the first ripple of change was already in motion. By noon, Harper's Cafe had transformed from a quiet corner on Main Street into the epicenter of a storm shaking Franklin to its core. And it was no longer just a local incident. It had become a national story unfolding in real time as Maya Johnson's live stream exploded past 1 million views. The comments flying so fast they blurred together. Hashtags like Justice for Amara, Harper Cafe Incident, and Accountability Now dominating every trending list across social media platforms. The sound of news helicopters thundered above, drowning out the chatter of hundreds gathered on the sidewalks, phones raised like an army of unblinking witnesses while the crowd swelled well beyond the cafe's patio, spilling into the street as Franklin police scrambled to keep order. Inside the police station a few blocks away, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes stood beside Judge Amara Thompson in a stark white interview room. The contrast between the chaos outside and the quiet inside almost unbearable, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above them. Amara sat straight-backed at the table, her navy blouse perfectly pressed despite the chaos of the morning, her cheek now bruised, the red welt deepening into a purple mark that cameras had captured from a dozen angles. A plastic bottle of water rested untouched in front of her, condensation pooling beneath it as if even the air itself carried the weight of tension. Across from her sat a young records officer typing furiously, transcribing her statement word for word as Hayes stood nearby, pacing, his phone vibrating constantly in his hand with updates from every direction, the chief of police demanding answers, the mayor's office calling repeatedly, and journalists clogging the department's lines with questions they couldn't yet answer. Outside the station, 3 different news vans were parked side by side, reporters standing in front of their cameras speaking rapidly into their microphones as headlines flashed on screens across the country. Tennessee Supreme Court judge assaulted in Franklin. Viral video sparks outrage and demands for justice. And police department under fire after officer slaps sitting judge. Inside the cafe, Maya remained at the center of the storm she had unintentionally unleashed, holding her phone tightly as notifications exploded across her screen faster than she could read them. Requests for interviews, friend requests from reporters, lawyers offering assistance, and strangers thanking her for capturing the truth. Her eyes burned, but her determination didn't falter. Her voice cracked slightly when she whispered into her live stream. "People need to see this. They need to know. Beside her. Eleanor Brooks stood like an anchor, speaking calmly to a small group of community members already drafting a statement demanding accountability. Her decades as a civil rights activist suddenly thrust back into sharp relevance as she coordinated phone calls, reached out to local leaders, and reassured frightened young witnesses who had seen everything unfold. Meanwhile, Carter's name was already plastered across trending searches. His personnel file leaked online by an anonymous source within the department, exposing 3 prior excessive force complaints that had been quietly buried. The revelations only fueled the outrage, journalists descending on Franklin from Nashville, Memphis, and Atlanta as national outlets prepared live coverage of the developing scandal. Hayes entered the interview room again, handing Amara a small packet of tissues. His face lined with exhaustion, but his voice steady as he briefed her. "The video's everywhere now," he said softly, setting his phone on the table so she could see. Headlines screamed back at her from every app. Clips of Carter's open palm slap slowed down frame by frame, hashtags demanding his arrest, and tens of thousands of people calling for broader reform within the Franklin Police Department. Amara didn't speak immediately. Her dark eyes focused instead on the ripple effect she was now unwillingly at the center of. Her fingers lightly brushing the edge of her Supreme Court badge still clipped to her blazer pocket. She finally broke her silence, her voice quiet but firm. "This isn't just about me. Marcus." It never was. Hayes nodded, understanding without needing to be told, because he had spent 25 years watching these moments come and go, each one promising change but too often fading before anything real could happen. This time, though, felt different. The sheer scale of the public response, the cameras, the witnesses, the live streams, there was no containing it. As Amara continued her statement, choosing each word carefully to ensure her focus stayed on dignity and justice rather than personal anger. Outside the station, a candlelight vigil was already being planned for the evening, coordinated by Eleanor and local faith leaders who refused to let the moment pass quietly. Maya, now sitting on the cafe steps surrounded by reporters, wiped her damp palms on her apron as she answered questions cautiously, refusing to sensationalize the moment, instead repeating the facts clearly, her voice soft but unwavering. He slapped her. "I filmed it. The world saw it. That's all." The honesty of her statement only amplified public empathy. Her live stream now bookmarked by countless major outlets citing her video as the definitive account of the incident. Within hours, Franklin's mayor released a statement promising a full and transparent investigation, though the words rang hollow to many who had seen similar promises dissolve before. While civil rights organizations issued joint demands for Carter's immediate termination and an independent probe into the police department's handling of prior complaints, the governor's office released a brief comment acknowledging the incident but avoiding specifics, fueling speculation and raising even more questions about systemic failures. Hayes, meanwhile, faced his own storm within the department, arguing with senior leadership behind closed doors as some officers defended Carter, claiming protocol confusion, while others quietly admitted the video left no room for interpretation. In group chats and private calls, local business owners organized a boycott of Franklin PD fundraisers, community leaders drafted letters to the state attorney general, and activists prepared a march to take place the following day. Amara remained composed through it all, though privately, as she sat in the interview room with Hayes. She allowed herself one moment of quiet reflection, closing her eyes briefly as the weight of her parents' sacrifices pressed against her memory. Her father's voice, steady and proud, echoed in her mind. "Stand your ground. Amara, never let them define you." She inhaled deeply, opened her eyes, and straightened her shoulders, ready to face what was coming next. Hayes placed a reassuring hand on the back of her chair. "We'll get through this," he said quietly, though his expression betrayed how much he knew this was only the beginning. By late afternoon, national anchors were reporting live from Franklin. The Harper's Cafe footage replayed on every major network, dissected frame by frame while pundits debated its implications on policing, race, and systemic accountability outside the cafe. The crowd had swelled beyond capacity, a mix of anger and solidarity as community members passed out bottled water, offered hugs to strangers, and began laying flowers near the curb where Amara had stood when Carter struck her. Maya's name trended alongside Amara's, strangers praising her courage while sending her direct messages filled with gratitude and grief. Through it all, Amara stayed focused, declining interviews, issuing only a single statement through her clerk's office late in the day. "This is not about one badge or one title. This is about the dignity owed to every person, no exceptions." The words spread quickly, shared across millions of screens, drawing even more attention to the broader fight her experience now represented. That night, as streetlights glowed and candles began flickering along Main Street, Amara stood by Hayes at the police station's exit, the roar of the gathered crowd audible from blocks away, a living reminder that the slap seen by millions had become more than a single act of misconduct. It was a turning point, and neither Franklin nor the country would be able to look away. 2 weeks later, the Franklin County Courthouse stood at the center of a storm that had grown far beyond Main Street, its marble steps lined with cameras, reporters, and protesters carrying signs that read, "Justice for Amara, Dignity has no badge, and accountability now." The viral video from Harper's Cafe had been replayed millions of times on every major network, every angle dissected frame by frame, and now the trial everyone had been waiting for was finally underway. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was heavy with tension, reporters whispering into microphones, camera shutters clicking softly as they captured every flicker of expression across the room. At the defense table, Officer Daniel Carter sat stiffly in a wrinkled gray suit, his once confident demeanor replaced by pale unease, his gaze fixed on the polished wood before him as though avoiding the eyes of the world trained squarely on him. Beside him, his defense attorney, Laura Preston, shuffled papers nervously, her lips pressed into a tight line as she prepared to argue what many believed to be an impossible case. Across the aisle sat the prosecution, flanked by community advocates and civil rights attorneys who had volunteered their expertise after the video sparked national outrage. Presiding over the case was Judge Caroline Whitaker, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s known for her no-nonsense approach and her unwavering insistence on fairness. From the bench, her presence radiated authority, her voice calm yet commanding as she called the court to order and reminded everyone present that decorum would be maintained, regardless of outside pressures. Amara Thompson entered quietly, dressed in a simple black dress and navy blazer, her posture straight, her expression calm yet resolute. Her cheek had healed, but the memory of Carter's slap lingered in the collective consciousness of everyone watching, captured permanently in the viral clips replaying across the country. As she took her seat at the witness stand, the entire room seemed to lean forward, aware that her testimony could determine not only the outcome of this trial, but also the larger conversation unfolding nationwide about race, power, and accountability in policing. The prosecution began by laying out its evidence methodically, presenting Maya Johnson's live stream first. The video played on a massive screen visible to the entire courtroom, the sharp sound of Carter's voice barking orders filling the space before the moment of impact echoed through the speakers. That single slap freezing time once again as gasps rippled softly across the audience. Multiple camera angles followed, collected from Harper's Cafe security footage, nearby bystanders, and even one recorded across the street, together. The evidence painted an inescapable narrative. Amara had been calm, compliant, and respectful, and Carter had escalated without provocation. Witness after witness took the stand to corroborate the video. Eleanor Brooks describing the silence that fell after the slap. A teenage skateboarder recounting the moment Carter's demeanor shifted from irritation to violence, and other cafe patrons testifying that Amara had done nothing to justify the aggression. When it was finally Amara's turn, the courtroom stilled to absolute silence. She raised her right hand, swore her oath, and settled into the witness chair with steady composure. The prosecutor, a seasoned civil rights attorney named Anthony Reed, approached with quiet respect, his voice low but clear. "Judge Thompson," he began, "can you tell the court what happened that morning on Main Street?" Amara took a measured breath, her voice calm yet deliberate as she recounted each detail, her cautious driving, Carter's abrupt stop, her attempts to comply, the sudden violence of his hand across her face, and the moment she revealed her badge not as a weapon, but as a simple statement of truth. "I was not seen as a person," she said softly, her words heavy with meaning. Not until my title made him pause. A hush fell over the courtroom as her words hung in the air, settling into the minds of everyone listening. Carter shifted uncomfortably at the defense table, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Laura Preston rose to cross-examine, she tried to frame the incident as a stressful misunderstanding, implying Carter had acted on instinct out of concern for his safety, but Judge Whitaker leaned forward, cutting through the argument sharply. "Counselor," she said firmly, "this court deals in facts, not speculation. Please confine your questions to the evidence." Preston hesitated, her case unraveling with each failed attempt to redirect blame, finally settling on claiming Carter had lacked critical context about who Amara was. But the prosecutor's rebuttal was swift and damning. No title, no badge, no robe grants you basic dignity. Being human does. The law protects that dignity, regardless of context. It was a turning point in the trial, the words striking with undeniable force. The courtroom stirred, whispers cascading through the benches as reporters frantically scribbled notes and sent updates across news wires. Outside, crowds gathered around large screens broadcasting the trial live, thousands standing shoulder to shoulder in Franklin's courthouse square, holding candles and banners demanding justice. Back inside, Amara remained composed through hours of questioning, her steady presence a quiet contrast to Carter's unraveling defense. Hayes, seated behind her in quiet solidarity, kept his gaze fixed forward, his jaw set tight with restrained anger but tempered by pride at Amara's unshakable resolve. Finally, after days of testimony and deliberation, Judge Whitaker called the courtroom to attention as the jury returned with their verdict. The atmosphere thickened as the four-person stood, a folded slip of paper trembling slightly in their hands. "On the charge of battery," the four-person said, voice steady despite the silence pressing in from every corner. "We find the defendant guilty." A wave of sound crashed through the room, reporters rushing to capture reactions, quiet sobs mixing with gasps of relief. The four-person continued, "On the charge of abuse of authority, guilty, and finally, on the charge of violating the civil rights of Judge Amara Thompson, guilty." Carter slumped in his chair, his face pale, his hands limp in his lap as the weight of the verdict sank in, his career in ruins, his badge surrendered, his authority stripped, outside. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd, chants of justice for Amara, rising into the evening air as people hugged strangers and held their candles high. Inside, Amara sat quietly, her eyes lowered, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if grounding herself amid the storm she had never asked for, but had endured with quiet grace. When reporters called out her name as she left the courthouse, she paused briefly at the steps, her voice carrying just enough for the cameras to catch her words. This is not about one officer, one badge, or one case. This is about dignity. It's about accountability. And it's about every single person who has ever been silenced or dismissed because someone believed they could act without consequence. Justice is not a privilege. It is a right. The statement rippled through headlines within minutes, quoted on every major network, trending alongside hashtags that now stretched far beyond Franklin as voices from across the country joined the conversation. Judge Whitaker announced Carter's sentencing would take place in 2 weeks, and while the trial had ended, the movement it sparked was just beginning, fueled by the unshakable clarity of Amara's words and the undeniable power of Maya's video. In the courthouse square, as the sun dipped low and lights flickered on across the city, people lingered in the growing dusk, chanting softly, united by something larger than outrage alone, a shared belief that this time, change felt possible. That evening, as the golden light faded over Franklin, Main Street transformed into something the town had never seen before. Outside Harper's Cafe, where everything began, hundreds gathered carrying candles, flowers, and handwritten signs that read, "Dignity for all, justice for Amara, and end abuse of power." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the crowd had swelled to more than 350 people, neighbors, teachers, shop owners, students, pastors, activists, and families standing shoulder to shoulder. The sound of quiet murmurs mixed with the soft hum of a guitar as a local musician strummed beneath a street lamp, his low chords grounding the growing tide of emotion. News crews lined the sidewalks, their cameras capturing faces bathed in candlelight while drones buzzed softly overhead, broadcasting the vigil live to tens of thousands watching from across the country. At the center of it all stood Judge Amara Thompson, her posture steady, her expression calm yet reflective as she gazed at the sea of flickering lights stretching down the street. She hadn't planned to speak. She never wanted this to be about her. But as Eleanor Brooks, the silver-haired activist whose voice had become one of the vigil's anchors, handed her the microphone, Amara knew silence was no longer an option. Her voice, soft at first but clear and resonant, carried over the hush of the crowd. "Change begins when we refuse to stay silent," she said, pausing briefly as the words settled into the heavy night air. "Tonight isn't about me. It isn't about one title, one badge, or one courtroom. It's about every person who has ever been made to feel invisible, every neighbor who has been dismissed, every voice that's been silenced. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a right." The crowd murmured in agreement, the flicker of candles glowing brighter as if feeding off her resolve. Maya Johnson, standing near the cafe steps, wiped her eyes as she recorded Amara's speech, her live stream viewership climbing past 200,000. Comments flooded in from across the country, strangers sending prayers, sharing their own stories, and thanking her for her courage in capturing the moment that had sparked it all. When Amara looked toward Maya, she offered a small, heartfelt nod, and Maya whispered into her phone, "She's not just standing for herself. She's standing for all of us." Eleanor stepped forward next, her voice steady, seasoned by decades of advocacy. "I've seen moments like this before," she said, her silver hair gleaming under the soft glow of the streetlights. "I've seen promises made, only to watch them fade when the cameras leave. But I look at this crowd tonight, at the faces young and old, and I believe this time is different. I believe we won't let it fade." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, some people raising their candles higher as a show of solidarity. In the back, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes stood with several officers, his uniform crisp, his presence quiet yet commanding. He wasn't there in any official capacity. Tonight, he stood as a citizen, a father, and a man who had given 25 years to a system he knew was deeply flawed. When approached by reporters, he spoke plainly. This isn't just about accountability for one officer. It's about rebuilding trust, brick by brick, person by person, and that begins right here, with all of us. The crowd erupted into gentle applause, the sound soft but powerful, a shared understanding that reform required both justice and reconciliation. As the evening deepened, soft chants began weaving through the vigil, hundreds of voices joining in. Justice for all, over and over. The words rippled across the street, carrying upward into the warm summer night. Children held their parents' hands tightly, college students linked arms, and elderly residents stood with quiet strength, their faces illuminated by candlelight. News anchors standing nearby whispered into their microphones, their voices barely audible against the swell of emotion, reporting that this wasn't just a local story anymore, it was a national moment of reckoning. At one point, Maya found herself surrounded by community members thanking her for her courage, strangers hugging her, their gratitude overwhelming. "I just pressed record," she said softly, shaking her head, her voice breaking under the weight of their words. "But if it means my brother's death wasn't in vain, then maybe this matters more than I thought." Her quiet confession caught on the live stream, comments pouring in from viewers who shared similar losses, a tide of collective grief merging into hope. Across the street, a group of young volunteers handed out water bottles and small printed flyers outlining upcoming town hall meetings focused on police reform, transparency, and community oversight. Franklin's city council had already announced an emergency session in response to public demand, signaling the first real steps toward change, yet for all the weight of the moment. The vigil carried an undercurrent of something lighter, not joy, but solidarity, a shared determination that burned brighter than anger alone. People weren't just mourning what happened, they were claiming their power to shape what came next. When Amara returned to the microphone, her voice was stronger this time, more certain. Tonight is proof that we are more than headlines. We are more than hashtags. We are human, and we are bound together by our refusal to accept injustice as normal. Her words drew a swell of applause, many lifting their candles high until the street shimmered like a constellation come to earth. Eleanor joined her, resting a hand lightly on Amara's shoulder, and together they stood facing the crowd. Two generations of women united by purpose, their strength mirrored in the faces before them. Near the cafe steps, Hayes leaned against a railing, his gaze scanning the crowd as though memorizing this moment. He knew change wouldn't come overnight. Systemic flaws couldn't be undone in a single trial or vigil. But for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest that had long been buried beneath cynicism. Hope. Beside him, a fellow officer whispered quietly, "Feels different this time, doesn't it?" Hayes nodded slowly, his expression solemn but resolute. "It has to be," he replied. As the vigil neared its close, hundreds bowed their heads together in a moment of silence, the flickering candles forming a river of light down Main Street. Even the reporters fell quiet. The only sounds the rustle of leaves in the warm night air and the distant hum of traffic beyond the square. When the silence broke, the chants returned. Louder this time, echoing against the buildings as though carried on the wind itself. Dignity for all. Justice for all. By the time the crowd began to disperse, the sidewalks were lined with candles left burning low, a quiet promise etched in wax and flame that this moment would not be forgotten. As Amara walked back toward her car, Maya hurried to catch up, holding out her phone, her voice trembling as she asked, "Judge Thompson, what happens now?" Amara paused, resting a hand lightly on Maya's shoulder, her eyes warm but steady. "Now," she said softly, "we keep going, we keep showing up, and we make sure the next person standing where I stood won't have to stand alone." Those words, simple yet profound, rippled across the live stream, replayed millions of times within hours, inspiring vigils in other cities and sparking panels, petitions, and calls for reform nationwide. That night, Franklin didn't just hold space for pain, it claimed space for possibility, setting into motion a movement bigger than anyone could have imagined. And though Amara returned home exhausted, she sat on her porch beneath the quiet stars with one unshakable thought anchoring her heart. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, the steps of the Tennessee Supreme Court overflowed with people, the plaza alive with cameras, banners, and a restless energy that hung heavy in the humid summer air. National media outlets had descended on Nashville, their vans lined along the street while reporters whispered into microphones and drones buzzed quietly overhead, capturing every possible angle. Judge Amara Thompson stood behind a podium placed at the top of the grand marble staircase, the state seal glinting faintly in the sunlight behind her. She had hesitated when first asked to speak. She never sought the spotlight, never wanted her name to become a symbol. But after the trial, after the vigil, after the tidal wave of support and demands for reform, she understood that silence was no longer an option. Behind her sat the full panel of justices, members of the legislature, community leaders, clergy, and civil rights advocates, while before her, stretching far beyond the courthouse gates, thousands had gathered shoulder to shoulder, their voices quiet, but their presence undeniable. As Amara stepped to the microphone, a hush swept over the plaza, broken only by the muffled clicks of cameras capturing the moment. She paused, letting the weight of it settle, her gaze sweeping slowly across the sea of faces. Before she began, "Justice," she said softly, her voice carrying despite its calm tone, "is not an abstract promise written on paper. It lives, or it dies, in our daily choices." The crowd stilled further, leaning in as her voice strengthened, her words deliberate and resonant. 2 weeks ago, I stood on Main Street in Franklin. I stood there as a black woman, a judge, and a citizen, and in that moment, I was reminded, painfully, that titles and positions do not shield us from prejudice. But what happened next reminded me of something far more powerful, our shared capacity to demand better, to demand dignity. Applause rippled softly through the crowd, restrained but heartfelt, the sound swelling gently before quieting again as she raised her hand slightly for calm. "I am not here today because of what happened to me," she continued. "I am here because what happened is part of a pattern too many have endured, too many have witnessed, and too many have buried in silence. And silence." She paused, her voice dropping lower, each word deliberate. "Has a cost." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in, and across the country. Millions watched as the live stream surged past 2 million viewers. Her words carried instantly into living rooms, offices, and classrooms nationwide. Behind her, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes stood among other law enforcement officers invited to attend, his gaze fixed on her with quiet respect, his arms folded tightly across his chest as though holding himself steady. In the crowd below, Maya Johnson streamed the moment live, her comments section exploding with hearts, prayers, and words of solidarity, while Eleanor Brooks stood near the front, holding a single white candle even in the heat of day, her eyes glistening as she whispered softly, "This is history." Amara leaned slightly forward into the microphone, her voice rising with quiet strength. "The question before us is not whether justice failed that day on Main Street," she said. "The evidence showed us that clearly. The question before us is whether we have the courage to do more than react, whether we are willing to act, to confront the systems that have allowed bias to hide in plain sight, to demand accountability, not just for one person, but for an entire structure that has failed too many, for too long." The crowd erupted into applause this time, louder, longer, the sound carrying into the open plaza, bouncing off the courthouse walls before it gradually subsided again, when silence fell. Amara's tone softened, shifting from fierce determination to quiet hope. "I've read thousands of letters in the past 2 weeks," she said gently. "From parents who worry for their children every time they leave home. From veterans who wonder if their service will ever grant them true equality. From teenagers asking if dignity is something they will have to fight for their entire lives. And I want to tell them this: you are seen, you are heard, and you are not alone." As her words carried, a murmur rippled through the crowd, tears streaking faces, arms linked in solidarity, strangers holding hands as if grounding each other in the gravity of the moment. A young boy perched on his father's shoulders, no more than 10 years old, cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "I want to be a judge like you." The crowd chuckled softly, warmth breaking through the tension, and Amara smiled faintly for the first time during her speech, nodding toward him as she said, "Then promise me this: be fair, be kind, and never stop asking hard questions." The exchange rippled across social media instantly, replayed thousands of times as the symbolic heart of the day. A reminder that this moment was not just about reckoning, but also about inspiring the next generation. Amara's expression turned solemn again as she continued, her voice steady despite the rising emotion in her tone. "We stand at a crossroads," she said. "One path leads us back to complacency, where this becomes just another headline, another viral video, another forgotten promise. The other path, the harder one, demands that we choose courage over comfort, progress over convenience, and justice over silence. That path requires every one of us." A wave of cheers broke out, chants of justice for all, rolling across the plaza like thunder before subsiding as Amara raised her hand gently once more. "This moment," she said softly, "is not the culmination of anything. It is the beginning. The work is bigger than one case, bigger than one courtroom, bigger than any one of us. And yet, it belongs to all of us." As she stepped back from the microphone, the crowd rose in a standing ovation, the sound reverberating across the courthouse steps, chants mingling with applause, people lifting candles, banners, and phones into the air as though marking the start of something new. Behind her, the justices rose as well, their faces solemn, some moved to quiet tears, recognizing the historic nature of what they had witnessed. The live stream climbed to over 5 million viewers within the hour, hashtags multiplying, speeches clipped and shared in real time across platforms, turning Amara into an unlikely national symbol of resilience and reform. Yet, as she stepped away from the podium, she turned to Hayes and Maya, who had moved to the side of the stage, and whispered softly, almost to herself, "This isn't about me." Maya smiled faintly, tears in her eyes as she shook her head. "Maybe not," she said, her voice low but steady. "But you gave us a reason to believe it can be different." Hayes nodded in agreement, his deep voice rumbling like quiet thunder. "And that," he said simply, "changes everything." Cameras continued flashing, reporters calling out questions. But Amara didn't linger. Instead, she moved to the edge of the steps, greeting children first, clasping hands with elders, listening as people shared their stories in hurried fragments between tears and smiles. She knew the work ahead would be exhausting, complicated, and relentless. But as she looked out over the plaza, the candles, the faces, the banners, she felt the spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks: hope. And somewhere in that crowd, the young boy who'd shouted his dream stood holding his father's hand, looking up at her with wide, unblinking eyes, believing for the first time that the future might hold something better. Months later, Franklin had returned to its quiet rhythms, but the memory of what happened outside Harper's Cafe still lived in every corner of the town, etched into its history like a scar that couldn't be hidden. The courthouse steps, once crowded with protesters and cameras, now stood still under the early autumn sun, yet the echoes of chants for dignity and justice remained heavy in the air. Inside the courtroom, Officer Daniel Carter sat stiffly at the defense table during his sentencing, his pale face tense, his suit wrinkled, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of everything he had lost. Judge Caroline Whitaker presided once again, her voice calm, steady, and deliberate as she recited the charges one by one. Guilty of battery, guilty of abuse of authority, and guilty of violating Judge Amara Thompson's civil rights. When she delivered her sentence, 5 years in state prison, without parole. The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing on everyone present. Carter lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his once defiant expression replaced by quiet defeat. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed to deliver the news, microphones raised and cameras flashing, headlines updating instantly across every major network: former officer sentenced, justice in Franklin, and Amara Thompson's case sparks reform. But Amara wasn't celebrating. This was never about one man, one verdict, or one slap. In the weeks that followed, the Tennessee Attorney General launched a sweeping investigation into the Franklin Police Department, exposing a pattern of misconduct, ignored complaints, and systemic failures buried for years. 3 senior officials resigned. New leadership was appointed, and for the first time, an independent civilian oversight board was established to hold the department accountable. De-escalation training, bias workshops, and community forums became mandatory statewide. Reforms born from pain but pushing toward progress. Amara watched from a distance, preferring quiet over cameras, focusing on her work at the Tennessee Supreme Court and choosing not to be consumed by the image others had made of her. One evening, she sat on her porch beneath a soft canopy of stars, rereading a letter from Maya Johnson, the 19-year-old barista whose live stream had changed everything, in her neat handwriting. Maya wrote about enrolling in pre-law courses, inspired by what she had witnessed. "You gave me hope. I'll keep fighting. For my brother. For you. For everyone who deserves to be heard." Amara folded the letter carefully and placed it beside dozens of others she had received, from students, grieving families, and strangers across the country, all bound by a shared longing for dignity and justice. Eleanor Brooks visited often, her silver hair glinting in the fading light, her energy undimmed as she worked with community groups to ensure Franklin's reforms continued. Together, she and Amara attended town halls, spoke with local leaders, and mentored younger advocates like Maya, who had stepped fully into her role as a voice for change. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, now promoted to deputy chief under the department's new leadership, worked from within to rebuild trust between officers and the community, his quiet determination driving every policy he fought to implement. One afternoon, Hayes met Amara on Main Street, stopping with her outside Harper's Cafe, where a small memorial had been created. Fresh flowers and candles surrounded a bronze plaque installed by the community. "To everyone who has ever been silenced, you are seen, you are heard, you are not alone." Amara traced the engraved words with her fingertips. A faint, thoughtful smile touching her lips as she whispered softly, "This is a beginning, not an ending." Hayes nodded, his voice low but resolute. "We keep going." Months later, Amara returned to her bench, her rulings sharper, her empathy deeper, her sense of purpose renewed. She began speaking at universities like Vanderbilt, reminding students that the law is only as strong as the people who choose to uphold it, her lectures sparking debates and inspiring young lawyers to think beyond statutes and toward humanity. Maya called often, sharing updates about her studies and internships, her confidence growing with each passing month. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said during one late-night call. Amara smiled, her voice warm but firm. "You're here because you chose to stand up. That's what matters." On the first anniversary of the Harper's Cafe incident, the community gathered again, this time in celebration, not protest. Main Street glowed beneath hundreds of candles, music floating softly through the air as neighbors, activists, and leaders stood side by side, honoring both progress and the work still ahead. Maya spoke first, her voice steady as she dedicated her journey to her late brother's memory. Eleanor followed, reminding the crowd that reform required constant vigilance, her words earning quiet nods from those who understood too well how fragile progress can be. Finally, Amara stepped forward, her simple navy dress fluttering in the summer breeze. No podium, no prepared remarks, just her voice carried by the quiet of the evening. "1 year ago," she said softly, "we stood here shaken and angry. Today, we stand here changed, not perfect, not finished, but moving forward together." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, her tone steady but filled with quiet conviction. "The legacy of that day is not pain," she said, "but possibility. It's a reminder that when we stand together, we are louder than fear, stronger than prejudice, and braver than silence." The crowd erupted into gentle applause, candles lifting higher until the street shimmered like a river of light. Later that night, Amara walked home beneath a canopy of stars, passing Harper's Cafe, now rebuilt and thriving. She stopped briefly at the memorial, watching the candles flicker softly, their glow carrying the weight of everything that had happened, the pain, the progress, and the promise of what lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and let the quiet wash over her, knowing this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, the start of a movement bigger than herself, carried by voices refusing to be silenced, shaping a future where dignity was no longer fought for, but honored as a birthright. And as she walked on, her steps steady, her head high, she knew one unshakable truth: they were just getting started. If this story moved you, comment where you're watching from, subscribe, like, and share to spread Judge Amara's message. Thank you for watching.